Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is a topic that I want to cover kind of briefly about reincarnations and should you reincarnate your supports. Now, most oftentimes we hear people talking about reincarnating their tanks or the meta damage dealers as prime reincarnation topics, and I've never really seen more than a sentence or two ever directed toward the supports, or nor have I seen any kind of analysis done for the supports. And I think it's a topic worth exploring because, quite frankly, supports are some of the most common used characters in the game. So today, again, the general priority and buzz of reincarnations typically revolves around the tanks and the meta DPS. We're going to ask the question, what about supports? And just to clarify exactly how a support functions in this game, it's really about their AI and the coding, where an AI priority for a support is more curative than offensive, which means if there's an enemy in range and a teammate in range, and let's say your teammate is lower health, your character will opt to heal the teammate rather than attack the enemy, and that's a defining trait of what a support is in this game. And today we're going to cover generally the reincarnation classes and kind of work backward from there to see where Gumi values the stats for its supports. We'll get a closer look in particular at Velis, Resnick, and Ayaka as three of the most common and long-lasting and prevalent supports, and then some general conclusions of what I think after that deeper dive. Now, for the reincarnation classes, this is a very important thing because this is essentially insight as to where Gumi values let's say the definitive strengths of each one of these classes. Not all characters get equal reincarnations. They're segregated into different classes. So the physical melee DPS, their emphasis is really on that 180 attack as their primary stat. They get up to 20 crit rate as well, which is the highest of the bunch, and 2400 AP is definitely above average for what other damage dealers get. And the magical DPS here, you'll notice, only get 1800 HP. Magic characters on average get less HP than the physical counterparts, unfortunately. But for magical DPS, kind of the same thing here. They get 180 on the primary stat, they get 20 on the crit rate, and some slight increases to TP and AP. Now, for the physical and magical ranged DPS, physical ranged being like Alaya and Eliza, the magical ranged DPS being like Jaden and Summer Jaden, well, they get a slightly less here on the attack and magic side of thing, only 126 versus the 180. They get slightly lower HP, or significantly lower HP, but they really get the emphasis on the dexterity and the accuracy, where they're the highest accuracy of this group and the highest dexterity of this group. Now, for your evade, physical, and magical DPS, meaning like characters like Locke and then Elena, they're a little bit higher than the ranged in terms of HP, not by much. They do also take a step down on their attack and magic stats, only 105 versus the 126 and the 180. Where they get the primary love, though, is on their luck stat, the highest of the group at 45, and 20 evasion rate as well. So that's really their strength here in terms of what Gumi values for them as evasion units, and rightfully so. For the physical and magical tanks, their big strength is the HP stat. 3,300 total HP is far more than what the majority of these characters get. They only get 90 of their primary stat to attack or magic. They also emphasize the crit evade of 20. That's the highest of the group so far. That when we look at supports and say, well, what does Gumi think supports require for good stats? And it's really that they are matched in their primary stat up to 180, which is the highest you can get in this group, the highest crit evade tied with tanks at 20%, and then some of those bumps to TP and AP the highest in the group as well. So that's really where they value them. That 1500 HP, it's definitely lower than what the physical, melee, and magical damage dealers get, that 2400 and 1800, but 1500 is more than what most of the other characters get. So now that we have that in mind, we're going to look at three characters to observe, Velis, Resnick, and Ayaka. And here's the most important thing. When you look at what each of these stats individually offer, you have to ask yourself, do any of these stats actually mean anything to your support units? Because here's the thing, when you consider supports, the most important stats quite often are things like magic, healing power, cast time. Those are, big emphasis points for many of the supports. You don't often use abilities that require dexterity or luck or accuracy or evasion when you're in support. So many of these stats right off the bat are kind of wasted in the very definition of what a support is supposed to do. That's why it's very important to look at each of them individually. Now, so someone like Velis, the strength's much stronger survivability than the others, much higher AoE res on average. He's got protect and shell access. He's got a physical barrier and limit break. I would say medium TP requirements overall, and he technically has slightly stronger heals, which means more damage opportunities on average. And those damage opportunities, he's got a 40 Spirit Imperil for 3 turns, he's got a 38% Ice Imperil, and his limit break is a guaranteed hit, so you have some guaranteed damage there no matter what. So overall, he's got some offensive upside, which we're going to circle back to. That's a very critical piece of information to consider. Now, for his weaknesses, there's more than just this, but from a support perspective, after 3 snow heals, he's got a big curative drop off where he just kind of goes to single target arithmetician heals, which aren't nearly as strong. So we look at reincarnation observations and how some of those stats impact someone like Velis. Don't spend a lot of time analyzing these numbers. This is just some very rough stuff I did based off like a couple sample builds. You know, for him, magic, dexterity, and accuracy all help improve his offensive capabilities. That magic obviously going up from mid 1400s to about 1600s on average is a nice big bump here. He does get some extra crit rate as well. The extra TP, this is one thing that I did for all of them, is basically running through how much TP they had and whether or not that extra 40 gave them a significant bump or not. For him, a little bit, not a ton. So his base TP without being reincarnated was 319. And so he could use all of these abilities on the right, except for the yellow highlighted ones. When I gave him the reincarnation and the 40 TP, he could use a couple extra, but that being said, he is really close already for what he might be able to do for TP, and this is not including a TP passive on a rune for him, so you could theoretically get that 40 TP externally as well. So for him, not a big upgrade there from the reincarnation. Healing per cast, you'll notice this is roughly the same for all the supports, about 615 to 780 extra healing per cast overall. The damage, give or take about 500 more damage per attack. That's purely subjective though on a bunch of factors, so don't look at that for too long. The crit evade though, he is like a medium amount of crit evade. He really gets that extra 27% from the reincarnation, but 27% crit evade is very important when you compare them to what the reincarnation of the physical damage dealers get for crit rate, and that they basically offset. We'll come back to that at the very end, but the bottom line is, got some nice crit evasion. Now again, there's no conclusions yet. That's going to be the very end. This is just kind of looking at a snapshot view. For Resnick here, the strengths, that teammate physical barrier access is certainly a nice one. Her teammate devout buff of the lightning attack 30 debuff res, unit res 25, the decreased AP consumption. That's a really good one. And again, that's kind of one of those things that this is an exceptionally strong buff, but reincarnation has nothing to do with this buff. Nothing about reincarnated stats has anything to do with this teammate buff. It's still the same strength. Now, she does have very strong single target heals, where it's at instacast, 210 mod, also an attack magic and agility buff. She's also got a blend of both single and AoE heals on the arithmetician subjob as well. And on that note, she does require a ton of TP, particularly for that physical barrier that we'll see in a second. The teammate healing threshold of the arithmetician AI is also lower than that of other supports. That can be a good thing, but what I mean by that is each support in its AI has some kind of threshold that when it looks at a teammate, if there's 60% health, 40% health, 20% health, the AI will do something a little bit different. And for arithmeticians, their threshold is a little bit lower than some others. So arithmeticians, if I recall, you need to be 40% or lower of your threshold for them to heal you. And so if you're at 50% of your health, they'll go offensive instead, which can be a good thing, can also be a bad thing. But what that basically means is there's more opportunities for Resnick to attack if her arithmetician threshold isn't met. So there is something to be said for offensive potency, but her accuracy is trash. It's one of the worst in the game. And so if she decides to go and attack things, you can't have her missing, or that's a full wasted turn. Now, for the reincarnation observations, kind of the same things as Velis here. It's kind of repetitive. You get to that 1400s to 1600 magic stat, you get a very strong accuracy bump. We'll talk about that in just a couple bullet points here. Much higher crit rate as well. She's got the highest crit rate out of them, but that's also vision card driven, just for what Lightning has for vision cards. The extra TP is nice, but not really enough, and there's really a big asterisk on this. It's whether or not you have her use Law of Refuge or not. That's a very costly TP ability at 42 TP each, and so if you are using it, the difference in reincarnation or not is basically these two extra yellow highlighted ones, which probably not game changing. But if you're not using that, you can use a lot more height curas in your total kit, which is very important for just better ranged healing and AoE healing. Now, the extra healing per cast, a little bit lower than Velis, but still that 570 to 720 range. It's roughly the same for many of these, about 500 more damage per attack. And the crit evade, hers is the highest out of the three of them, just given what some of her innate critical evasion is. She gets that 27 crit evade though. But the accuracy, this is the biggest thing here. She gets 14% accuracy off the stat from the reincarnation, about 12% accuracy from the luck stat, and about 5% from the dexterity. So all in all, about 31% extra accuracy by being fully reincarnated. That's a lot of extra accuracy for a very low accurate unit. Now we look at Ayaka, again, different healer or support entirely. You have two different support builds here, White Mage or Time Mage. And again, if you're going Time Mage, well, a lot of these reincarnation stats have nothing to do with casting guard, haste, or anything like that. She does have full life access, enormous limit break heals, being to use it twice. Her Kiraga is a nice giant AoE that's got that 210 mod, 10 AP to allies, 25 crit evade, which means that they take less damage because they're not taking as many critical hits. You have that Time Mage option. Average healing power, not really higher or lower than the others, depends on your counter ability potentially, but her weaknesses, she'll quite often heal bot the team in that she does not have a lot of offensive abilities. It's really holy, and that's kind of it. So her AI is not really made to be doing damage, and she does have the worst durability of the group. There's an anti-magic niche, but for all other damage types, very squishy, so that HP is a little bit more of a factor here. Now, for the reincarnation observations, that extra magic does help the healing output, where she's kind of a heal bot. I think it's debatable, though, whether 500 to 700 or 800 extra healing is all that impactful for her, but that question is going to be answered again soon. The HP, in my opinion, doesn't really solve the durability issues, though, where because she's negative on a couple of them anyways, 1500 extra HP doesn't really mean a whole lot. Now, she does not require the extra TP at all, and using her Time Mage subjob, you can cast all of her abilities with no worry at all about ever running out of TP, so that's not a reincarnation factor at all. The healing per cast about the same as the others, the damage is about the same, the crit evade is nice, but the accuracy and crit rate, again, are kind of wasted due to her AI because she's not attacking, so accuracy and crit rate don't really mean anything. Now, so for the general observations, now that we've kind of gone through each three of them individually, we've looked at the classes overall, this is my takeaway for whether or not you should reincarnate support. So number one, it's immediately obvious to me that support reincarnations are largely to keep up with DPS reincarnations. The DPS get at most a 20% crit rate, the supports get 20 crit evade. So if you're bringing a support against a reincarnated damage dealer, that damage dealer is going to have a 20 crit rate head start just already off the reincarnations. By reincarnating your support, you equalize that and either completely negate that crit rate of 20% or even get higher. As you'll remember, 20 crit rate is the highest they give. Some of these other units only get 10. So in that instance, your supports get a net bump of 10 crit evade over reincarnated units. And the DPS on average get anywhere from 500 to 800 extra damage per attack. The supports basically offset that with what they get for their primary stat increase. Again, there's a lot of math to go on there in terms of healing power and what the faith is and what resistances are, but generally speaking, it's kind of competitive that the supports by and large will heal up much of the damage that the extra reincarnated damage does. Now, in my opinion, reincarnations help supports who generally get to attack more, where, again, you look at all of those stats, there's really only a couple that benefit pure healers, and they're not part of the reincarnation. So for those that have opportunities to attack, like Velis and Resnick, you have a much higher crit rate percentage. You also get higher damage because that magic stat is able to go two ways, both healing and damage. Same thing for the accuracy. That higher accuracy means more consistent damage overall. And TP is generally a support concern where no other characters ever really have to worry about TP. I personally don't know if 40 is enough to tip the scales for many of them. Most of them seem relatively okay anyway. And here's the big thing too. It's really only applicable to guild wars when you're talking about second defense or third defense. Anything else in the game that's a one match and done, arena, class match, quick play, whatever you want to call it, you're only fighting one time, so you're never going to totally deplete your TP reserve. So this is a very niche upside usage for that stat as well. The higher crit evade, though, is very impactful for survivability, in my opinion, where that extra damage is oftentimes not only the difference between being dead or not, as long as you're not dead means you can heal yourself. There's plenty of times where I've seen DPS just waste turns and waste all their AP trying to kill a Resnick, who they'll get Resnick at 25 health, she'll insta-heal herself. They do it again, she insta-heals herself. Next thing you know, they've done that 3 times and they're out of AP, and they're kind of crap out of luck. Making sure you don't die is very important, which is a big part of that. And like other reincarnation decisions, depends on how often they're used in your team. What's your long-term usage plan for them? Supports generally seem to have a longer half-life than other characters, as well as tanks, where, they give enough upgrades to those two classes, and there's just a limited pool of them that they do get better long-term usage overall compared to damage dealers. Damage dealers fade all the time due to power creep, but you'll see tons of supports years later now that still get top-tier usage in many applications. So there actually is a case to be made for whether or not you should invest the resources into them. But overall, should you reincarnate your supports? Quite honestly, I would likely tend to say not top priority, but it's something you should entertain if you use them a lot. If you're using Velis in nearly every single team and he's a big rainbow unit for you and you like what he does, bro, that's not a bad reincarnation, quite honestly. And honestly, even the same thing for Resnick. I've seen her single-handedly carry some of my fights with some of her offensive AI and putting an enemy to sleep and attacking him here and a long-range attack here. That her ability to not miss as often and to get that extra healing in, particularly for Arithmetician, where their healing is on average maybe slightly a little bit lower. It's really those characters that are kind of heal bots like Ayaka, where you get far less of the overall benefits of the reincarnation stats that they give you. But that's my takeaways in a nutshell. I doubt I answered the question definitively for many of you, but at least hopefully gave some perspective and some insight that you may not have heard elsewhere. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to y'all soon.